Welcome to Intellectual Dissatisfaction. We're building this interview series around nonpartisan political journalism, fair questions, concrete answers, and enough detail for voters to make up their own minds. Today, we're speaking with Julian Beaudion, a Democratic candidate for United States Senate. Julian, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Our goal today is simple. We want viewers to leave knowing who you are, what you actually want to do in Washington, and how you would represent South Dakotans.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, like your personal background, let them know kind of, what your work history is, your motivations for running for office, things like that.
For sure. So my name is Julian Beaudion. I am originally from Louisiana. My wife and I moved up here almost 20 years ago, and so we choose to call South Dakota home and have chosen it our entire adult life. My background is in law enforcement, but we have three beautiful daughters. So I want to start on the personal side, and then we can get into the things, the professional side of things right after that.
Sure.
Because I do believe in family first. I believe in neighbors first. I believe in community first. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm running as well, is because people matter to me. Okay. And so we have three beautiful daughters, 14, 10, and 5 years old. I tell people, I joke all the time, man, pray for me because this 14-year-old right now, she's in high school, and my mind is everywhere with her. But we are super blessed to have them. We also are small business owners. We own Swamp Daddy's Cajun Kitchen here in Sioux Falls. My wife is a tremendous chef. And so I really love the job that she's doing, but also the work that she does in the community too deserves to be highlighted. We are a family that just cares about people in general.
Sure.
My father is, before he passed away, was a retired teacher. He taught math in middle school down in Louisiana. My mom is a retired nurse, and so what I know is service. My family has been in service my entire youth, and then when I moved here to South Dakota, I became a state trooper. Spent 13 and a half years in uniform and continued to serve our community. From there, I became the state nominee for U.S. Marshal here in South Dakota under the previous presidential administration. And because of some of the work that I did in uniform and also some community work that I was doing, I was recognized by former President Barack Obama as one of the 100 most influential leaders across the country in 2024. Graduated his presidential leadership program in 25, and now, of course, we're running for United States Senate to continue our service to the state of South Dakota.
Wow, awesome. So I guess you said that your wife does a lot of work in the community. You want to expand on that? Like what specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. In education, she does a lot in the form of education. So she sits on the board of directors for a nonprofit organization, actually it's a school called ACE Academy. And ACE Academy really focuses on the kids that get left out in the public school. Technically, it's a private school, but there's some funding that they really work hard to commit to across our state to make sure that these kids get a free tuition to go to what's essentially a private school setting, to where they have more one-on-one focused attention,
Sure.
and they have better learning opportunities. Their attitudes are better, their behavior is better. And then we just have a tight-knit community when it comes to that. In addition, though, she is, of course, she's a chef, so she's huge on feeding people. And so every year she partners with a local construction company in town. And we feed over 500 people every year for Thanksgiving for free. So we've done it now 4 years in a row. And last year we actually served our highest number, which was about 850 folks. Wow. For free. So I think in total we are now over 3,500 folks that we've fed over the last 4 years.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess we could probably just jump right into the first question I have for you.
Let's do it.
So, while I was doing my research, first place I started was your campaign website. I couldn't really find any detailed issues page on your website. Is there a written platform where voters can review kind of what issues are important to you and more specifically how you want to tackle those? And I guess just for this interview, what would maybe three specific policies be that you would want them to know that you're looking to pursue?
Yeah, everything comes back to affordability. On our website, you won't find anything right now, and that's very intentional. We have now done 25 town halls across this entire state. And part of that initiative is to make sure that we're listening to people before we're building policies. I am a firm believer that I should not just be the representative that goes in and gives my opinion based on the things that I think is best for this state. I should be an accurate representation of who the people are. And if I'm going to do that, I need to listen. And so these town halls are intentionally set up for us to listen to the voice of the people, listen to some of the complaints, because you get into a town hall setting and there's definitely issues that people want to be vocal about, but we always turn it back to say, what are the solutions that are coming directly from the community?
Sure.
And we're building our platforms based on that. So because of that, here's the things that we've learned at those town halls, and these are the things that we are certainly touting also in the campaign. We want to focus on education. That's a really big thing. Our opponent, Mike Rounds, is the senator who introduced the legislation on the Senate side to dismantle the Department of Education. And parents across this entire state are really concerned about what that means for a state like South Dakota, who's already struggling just to feed kids.
Right.
We saw this year where Representative Caden Whitman, after 4 years, was able to finally get a bill passed just to be able to feed our kids. So that's a fight already in this state that parents were concerned about. And so now they're even more concerned when you're talking about funding being taken away for after-school care, funding being taken away for your special needs programs. Even the gifted programs will have funding taken away from them. So it's going to hit rural schools first, and then it'll start to hit more of your urban areas. And so that has to be our top priority, because that's our next generation of leaders. It's our next generation of business owners, and it's what the future of this state looks like. So that's number one. Number two is, of course, healthcare. I am a proponent for universal healthcare. And so one of those things that I strongly believe in is that we should all, as citizens of this country, we should all have proper health care, especially access to health care. And so in South Dakota, what we've seen is Mike Rounds has supported DOGE. And after the DOGE cuts, we've seen several rural hospitals close down.
Right.
We used to have 7 specialized OB/GYN clinics in rural South Dakota. We're down to 1 after those cuts.
Wow.
And so in many cases, you see women have to travel anywhere from 40 to 60 miles, sometimes even in excess of that, if they live on reservations, just to get specialized care for them. And so we want to make sure that we're fighting for universal health care, to make sure that we all have access to affordable health care. And then, of course, we want to talk about affordability in housing. I think that's really, really critical to what the future of this state looks like, especially as our population continues to grow. And when we talk about the affordability in housing, we also need to make sure that we're talking about housing that looks the part for that community. So housing on the reservations or even around the reservations will look much different than it does here in South Dakota.
Sure.
And so those policies cannot be just like this blanket or one size fits all type policy. It has to be one, again, that's accurately representing the community. So those are the 3 things that we are really concerned about, and also the top 3 things that we've been hearing from folks across the state.
Okay, great. Can you name one bill that you would introduce, or one that you would co-sponsor, and maybe one federal program that you would fight to protect?
Yeah, I'll answer that in one. Again, going back to our top priority, which is protecting the federal Department of Education.
Okay.
We have to put parameters around protecting that department, and also not moving the resources from one department to the next. Right now, the proposal is I'll give you an example. Yesterday, we had a town hall in Brookings, and we talked very specifically around what 504 looks like in education, the 504 program in education looks like. And so some of those programs are being moved from the Department of Education to other areas like the Department of Justice. Well, simultaneously, the Department of Justice is working alongside the U.S. Attorney's Office to get rid of civil rights protections. And so what that looks like for children in our state is really critical moving forward. So what we have to do on the federal level is not just provide policy that protects our federal Department of Education, we have to reinvest dollars and additional resources into our children. And so what we've seen is across the country, in places like Illinois and places like Maryland, where they have done exactly that on the state level. They've taken those federal dollars, reinvested additional resources into their state Department of Education, and they've seen 2 things happen: higher education or higher graduation rates, and lower crime rates. And that's something that we all want for our communities. We want to live in smarter and safer communities. It does exactly that. There's no reason to dismantle the Department of Education. We must invest in the future.
Great. It's an interesting topic. I had just spoke with Amanda Potter recently, and she had brought up block grant funding and moves, by Linda McMahon to try to push us in that direction. I guess just as a follow up to what you just said, do you have any opinion on that matter? Yeah,
block grants are temporary. I think we have to just remember that. When you typically think of block grants, you think of block grants in terms of going to nonprofit organizations, and it's typically either a stop grant, like a stop grant, or a gap grant is what they refer to them as sometimes, and it's just to fill a temporary gap. And so yes, it might look good on the surface, and it might look good for 2, maybe 3 years. But after that, what are rural education communities going to be doing? Where are the resources going to come from? And again, we're already fighting our state to make sure that we have enough resources for our children.
Right. Well, I guess let's go on to the next question. So I was in attendance at the No Kings protest, which you spoke at.
Yeah.
One of the things you said there was that your campaign is not just against something, but for the people to take our power back. In terms of the Senate and what you can do there, what does taking power back actually mean? Is it like voting rights, campaign finance reform, anti-corruption laws, stronger ethics rules, or something else?
I think first and foremost, we have to fall back on the values that South Dakotans hold. And we are committed to our neighbors. We're committed to building relationships and strong relationships with each other. So the very first thing that I think we should be doing is building a relationship across the aisle. I actually recently was asked a question about who do I look forward to working with most when I get to DC? And that answer is John Thune. And the reason why is because South Dakotans deserve to have true democracy.
Right.
And what democracy looks like to us is to make sure that we have a balanced and equal government system. And so having a Democrat in South Dakota working across the aisle with the Senate Majority Leader, who is a Republican, the highest Republican outside of the President and Vice President in this country, sends a signal to every other state in this country that they better get their act together because South Dakota really knows what we are doing. What that allows us to do is get farm bills in place. And I saw today the House actually passed a farm bill. We'll see where that goes. But that means that we can get farm bills in place and we can protect things like SNAP benefits for folks. We can protect things like Medicaid. We can then work towards what affordability and healthcare and housing looks like. And that works not just in favor of Democrats, but it works in favor of independents and Republicans and everyone in between.
Sure.
I'm definitely not someone who is interested in going against this narrative that Trump is this big bad guy or Rounds is really bad for the state. I'm not interested in fighting against them. I am interested in fighting for the people of South Dakota.
So I guess then, what would be the thing that you think you and Thune would be able to compromise on if you got into that position?
I'll know as soon as I get there. I'll tell you one thing. Looking at the history of someone like a John Thune, the criticism now that John Thune is receiving is that he doesn't have a backbone to stand up towards the current presidential administration. But I'll tell you what, when John Thune first got in office, he did have a backbone. And so we have to bring that back into focus. And we also have to focus on the issues that matter to people in South Dakota. We can't talk about these far right-wing issues and these far left-wing issues. We have to focus on things like affordability. And so the compromise really needs to be how do we make things more affordable for South Dakotans living right at home? How do we lower gas prices? How do we lower, it was a big conversation around the presidential race. How do we lower the cost of eggs in South Dakota?
Right? Yeah.
We just saw diesel fuel prices overnight here 2 nights ago, less than 48 hours ago, raise 59 cents.
That's crazy.
That's huge.
Yeah. That's
huge. And so how do we really come back to focus and not be distracted by some of these more national issues and work together to support South Dakotans?
So do you have a specific bill in mind then with respect to affordability that you're looking to propose right away when you get into office?
Yeah, I do think it's our responsibility as South Dakota representatives to really focus on what a comprehensive farm bill looks like.
Okay.
That is the number one economic driver in our state.
Sure.
In addition to that, I think we need to be really focusing on reducing tariffs and removing some of the tariffs. When you talk about the tariff on Canada, that has really stopped the production of parts for agriculture. And so John Deere, for example, completely stopped making products. And so our farmers are going to be hurting if that tariff continues, if the tariff stays on Canada, then we're going to see production rates really increase for our farmers. And so that equipment that they're using, that they typically change out every 2 to 3 years, or sometimes if it's a bigger farm, they change it out every year. These millions of dollars of pieces of equipment on farms, we're going to start to see those break down, and it's going to make life even more unaffordable for those farmers and those ranchers. And so we really have to focus on what a comprehensive bill looks like to protect our agriculture here in the state.
So on the topic of tariffs, are you speaking about basically the tariffs that the Trump administration put in place? And then if so, are there any that were put in place that you think are actually like a wise decision? Are there any good tariffs in your mind, or where do you stand on that?
I think tariffs can be strategically used. And one place in which I would be in favor of a tariff is actually in China. I would not be in favor of the tariff rate that it's at right now. I do think it needs to be reduced, but here's why I will be in favor of that staying in place just at a reduced rate. Talking with agriculture bankers across our state, they anticipate about 40% of our family-owned farms filing for bankruptcy at the end of this year. And we've seen a trickle-up effect from that. It started in Oklahoma last year. At the end of last year, 42% of Nebraska family-owned farms filed for bankruptcy. And I want to be clear, bankruptcy doesn't necessarily mean that these farms will close down and stop production.
Right.
It just means that they're financially in trouble. And so we anticipate 40% of our family-owned farms being financially in trouble and filing for bankruptcy right here in South Dakota. Well, there's a company called Acre Trade. And Acre Trade's, one of Acre Trade's largest investors is J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance purchases these bankrupted farms and then sends them right to China. There needs to be stopgaps put in place for that. And so when we talk about what a tariff looks like in aspects of agriculture, I think that actually works to save our farms from being sold to foreign organizations.
Wow, I didn't even realize that. That's pretty wild. I guess since we're on the topic of farms and rural areas, let's go back to healthcare and Medicare for all. So rural hospitals nationally are under financial pressure, and the KFF Health News has reported that some rural hospitals have canceled or considered ending Medicare Advantage contracts because of concerns about finances and patient care. And the American Hospital Association has warned about Medicare Advantage pressure on rural hospitals' ability to serve their communities. Would your healthcare position reduce costs for rural hospitals, or would it mainly expand coverage for patients? And then, what would be the mechanism that you would use to deploy?
Yeah, I think, so here's one thing that we don't look at often enough, I would say, when we talk about things like the expansion of Medicaid or even universal health care for that matter, is what role does the insurance companies play in healthcare? And specifically tying that to our rural health care centers in South Dakota, where many of the folks who staff those hospitals are not from South Dakota. They're traveling nurses,
right.
they're traveling physicians, and often we have to pay them. Those rural healthcare centers have to come out of their own pockets to pay them more than they would someone right here in South Dakota. And so I think the benefit of having something like universal health care is it also allows states to invest in dollars to educate folks to come into South Dakota, so go to school here and also work here. One thing that is probably not going to be very popular amongst Democrats, but it's something that I do believe in, is former Governor Kristi Noem, actually, and I can't remember exactly what it's called, but she had a mechanism in place to where if folks came to South Dakota and they went to school in South Dakota, they got I believe it's called the Freedom Grant. They got the Freedom Grant to give them tuition reimbursement as long as they worked here for an additional 3 years. That's a great program to have when you're talking about building up rural South Dakota. I think we should focus on common sense policies like that to go along with universal health care or even an expansion of Medicaid. And that actually protects the dollars in rural hospitals, it stops them from closing, and it puts money right back into rural economies.
So do you think that the insurance industry is maybe the biggest roadblock for our nation in terms of achieving the goal of universal health care?
I think it can be, and I think it is right now because our government allows it to be. I think we should definitely have stronger parameters on what insurance companies can and cannot do. Now, what those parameters are, I think that's a conversation for Congress to have between the House and the Senate. But yes, I think insurance companies have been just allowed to run wild for a long time. And it's not our job as citizens to bail out insurance companies.
Right.
So there certainly needs to be parameters on what they can and cannot do.
Okay. So you said South Dakota is not simply too red, and that voters look at character, not just party. What kind of Republican or independent voter do you think is genuinely persuadable in this race? And what would you say to them that is different from a national Democratic message?
Yeah, I think instead of maybe labeling it as what type of conservative, I'll say the average South Dakotan is open to common sense policies. And that by itself is different from what we hear in many other states, especially some larger states across this country. When I was a state trooper for, again, 13 and a half years, I saw people at their best days sometimes, pulling them over, but then also I was, fortunate enough sometimes to be there in their worst days and pick them up during their worst days. And not once did any of them ask me, are you a Democrat or a Republican?
Right.
They cared about the person who was there to help them in their time of need, in their time of crisis. And so right now, this is a critical time because I do feel like South Dakota is in crisis mode. And folks are not asking anymore, are you Democrat or Republican? They're asking, is this policy going to be beneficial to me? And I go back again to the 25 town halls that we've done across the state. At every single town hall, we've had a Republican stand up and be critical of this government. They are ready for change just as much as Democrats are ready for change in this state.
Okay. I actually would like to ask you one of our community submitted questions to follow that up. So given your law enforcement background and your focus on second chances, should reentry programs for formerly incarcerated South Dakotans be a major focus of your Senate work? And if so, how would you tackle it for South Dakota specifically and then nationally?
So that is a great question, but also a tough question. And I'll explain why. Because typically when you talk about parole and probation, that's out of the hands of Congress. That typically deals with the state side of government, and also it deals with the judicial system.
Sure.
So I would imagine that question is probably posed towards presumptive probation and the issue that we are having with the system of parole in the state as well. I will say I am a fan of what presumptive probation offers in theory. I'm not a fan of the way the system of parole is working right now for several different reasons. One very obvious is because just a couple days ago, we had someone who didn't meet the qualifications of parole but was still put on parole, and then they end up shooting a Sioux Falls police officer. That's unacceptable for the police department. It's unsafe,
right,
but it's also unacceptable for the public. One of the things that I think we need to really hone back on is what does rehabilitation in this system as a whole actually mean? We can't just be putting people back out on the streets without effective and impactful rehabilitation, not just for the community, not just for the police officer, but also the person that is going through that program needs to have a second chance to be rehabilitated back into our system.
So do you think we need to bolster those rehabilitation systems and programs?
I think we need to partner more with what maybe private equity companies are doing. And when I say private equity in terms of law enforcement, parole, and probation, I'm talking about nonprofits in the area. I think there needs to be more public and private partnerships in that area. And that's something, as a Democrat, we typically don't throw around that term a lot, public-private partnership. But I do think it will be beneficial in this area to reimagine what that looks like. I'm not a proponent of dismantling any type of system completely, but this is definitely one we need to reimagine, and maybe that reimagining needs to come from the ground up. However, I think reimagining any system comes with a set of responsibilities.
Yeah.
And those at the table making the decision and figuring out how that looks need to be folks who have re-entered into society to figure out what has worked for them. It needs to be police officers to make sure that it's good for the organizations that they're working for. It needs to be community members to make sure that the community is safe. And of course, it needs to be the politicians who have the power to put these things into policy.
Right. So would you support more federal funding for job training, housing, addiction treatment, mental health care, ID document access before release?
Absolutely. Not only would I support that, I would actually support listening to what a bill looks like from a federal standpoint, and I would be willing to introduce or co-sponsor that bill. When you talk about second chances, you can't do so without a resource, right?
Yep.
And so we have to be able to also not just talk the talk, but walk the walk.
Gotcha. What would you do specifically for Native communities, given the disparities in South Dakota's present population?
So first and foremost, I think what we have to do, and I've been taught this over the course of this campaign, and I'm really taking heed to this advice from the indigenous community directly, is that we have to move at the speed of trust. There has been so much distrust between Native communities and government systems, whether it's on the local level, state level, or federal level. And so you have to be able to move at the speed of trust, but also you have to do so with the recognition that these tribes deserve their sovereignty.
Right.
In addition to deserving their sovereignty, they deserve a recommitment from our governor, our government, to uphold the treaties that have been broken. That recommitment, though, does not come without an apology.
Right.
We have to make sure that we acknowledge and apologize from a government standpoint to our tribes, not just in South Dakota, but across this entire country, and then recommit ourselves to the values and the promises that we've made to them over the decades. Because we continue to make promises and we continue to break them as government systems. And we are seeing that in the Black Hills right now with the mining issues, mining on tribal lands. That is, it's unacceptable. It's the responsibility of our government to take care of people, not fight against people.
Okay. So with respect to Mike Rounds, you had a direct message for him. It was time's up.
Yeah.
What are 2 or 3 decisions from that Rounds made that best explain why you think he should be replaced?
So I'll focus on 2 decisions and 1 indecision.
Okay.
And actually the indecision is more broad, but the 2 decisions directly goes back to the Department of Education. His decision to go along with the current administration and dismantle that department it's unacceptable for, again, what the future of our state looks like.
Right.
We depend on our kids to stay in South Dakota, work in South Dakota, play in South Dakota. And also we depend on them to bring visitors to South Dakota, because we talked about how our main economic driver in the state is agriculture. Well, pretty close second to that is tourism.
Sure.
And so all of that is being affected by the decision that he made to dismantle the Department of Education. So that'd be number 1. Number 2, he is currently trying to do the same thing or even privatize or weaken the system for the United States Postal Service. Listen, I've stood side by side with union members from the Postal Service. I've stood side by side with federal workers as well, not just on the picket lines, but talking in private settings to them about the issues that are happening and impacting them. And we together are in the process right now of figuring out what a solution looks like.
Right.
Mike Rounds, on the other hand, just said that they suck, right? And so that's unacceptable from a leader who's representing this entire state.
Sure.
It's also really unacceptable for something that we rely on so heavily when we talk about the Postal Service. And so it's an irresponsible move by Mike Rounds for both of those things. Those are two decisions. Now, when you talk about indecisions, I think that he's just been indecisive his entire career, which is why I said that's probably more broad. From when he was governor to both of his terms now in the Senate, to even the point to where several years ago he wasn't, a couple years ago he wasn't committed to running for the United States Senate again for a third term until this current president endorsed him before he announced that he was running for re-election. And so it seems to me he doesn't want the job. It seems to me that he was forced into it, but he's not fully committed to the people of South Dakota. And I believe his decisions and his indecisions are clear to the people that he's not in it for them.
Near the end of the No Kings speech, you told people not just to protest, but to organize, vote, invest, and go on offense. If you lose this race, what should the movement you're trying to build do next? And if you win, how will voters know you haven't become part of the issue or part of the same system you're criticizing?
Yeah. So let's tackle that one thing at a time. In 2020, I ran for city council.
Okay.
And when I announced that I was running for city council, I dedicated myself to the people of this city, the people of this county, and of course the people of this entire state to say, listen, win or lose, I am committed to continuing to fight for you. When I ran in 2020, I was already a state trooper. I was already committed. I was already dedicated. And so my history speaks for itself. Serving in uniform, being an activist, being an advocate in some spaces, being engaged in the process, not just on the federal level of government, but on the local and city level of government as well. That proves in and of itself that I am for the people of this state, and this is not for self-benefit. Now, the second part of your question is when we win. I know you said if, but when we win and we do make it to DC, you'll see a lot of those things that I have been practicing, not just in principle, but the things that I've been practicing and advocating for. And again, standing side by side with my neighbors in South Dakota for, you'll see all of those things being fought for through the levels of policy. And I can tell you, based on my previous experience and the expertise that I've been able to build across the state over the years, it will not be very difficult for me as a Democrat in a very red state to go to DC and work across the aisle to get things done for the people back here.
I guess I wanted to kind of touch on this. It popped up in my head, but we kind of got going there earlier. So, interestingly, you organized the George Floyd protests.
I was one of the organizers. I want to give credit where credit is due, of course. Okay. Two young folks actually stepped up at the time, two college folks, and I won't say their name because they've asked to not be no notoriety, basically. And I want to respect that. So. Yes, I was happy to be one of those organizers at the time, but the brainchild behind it was these two young folks who recognized that something needed to be done in our community, accountability needed to be had in our community, and I believe that God just put me in place at the right time to say, listen, you're in uniform, you've been working to hold your own organization and local organizations accountable. You should definitely do the same for organizations across this country. Again, I wore the uniform to protect and serve the people.
Right.
And one of those things when you're talking about serving the people is also serving accountability when even the people that you serve with are wrong. You have to be able to step up and do that. So I did exactly that. I stood side by side with those young folks. And to this date, we actually, with the No Kings protest, I'm not sure exactly what the numbers look like now, but at the time, it was the largest march in the state's history. And we were really proud of what we accomplished because our protest, our march, was very, very peaceful. Now, I will tell you, we all know there's no secret that something else happened at the mall that same night. And here's how dedicated I am to the state of South Dakota. I was dedicated to making sure that we were holding law enforcement accountable while serving as a trooper during that march. And then that very same night, I had to put the uniform on and protect this city, right? There's not many people. I would actually venture to say there's probably nobody in this state that has done that before, that have those two different, not just those two different perspectives, but those two different unique sets of experiences.
Sure.
I've been able to serve people across the state in various ways.
So could you give maybe the biggest example of where accountability needs to be worked on in the police force?
You know, that's a really good question. I would say right now, in terms of accountability, man, if you're talking local police, I don't want to speak for local police organizations. However, I will put my fingerprint on what's happening nationally with federal police organizations. We've seen what has happened with immigration, and we've seen what's happened with ICE. And I think it is unacceptable to put our citizens in harm's way by deploying ICE into our city streets. I am all in favor of a safe border. As a matter of fact, I'm more than in favor of a safe border. Republicans will try to paint the picture of Democrats wanting open borders. That couldn't be further from the truth. We have to make sure that our borders are secure. We have to make sure that our borders are strong. And ICE plays an integral role in making sure that that happens. But in places like Minneapolis, in places like San Francisco, places like Chicago, they don't need to be in those streets. So here's maybe where I'll tie in that to local law enforcement agencies, but also part of the reason why I don't want to do that, because I also don't want to throw local law enforcement under the bus, because they have folks on the state level that they have to answer to. Is there comes a time in which federal law enforcement and local law enforcement have to work together for the betterment of the community. And right now, I think our government officials have put our local law enforcement officers in a really tough position to work in areas alongside federal law enforcement officers where many of them don't feel comfortable. Not just because of the job that they're doing, but because the lack of training on the federal side that many of these law enforcement officers are now required to go through. Our local law enforcement officers deserve a pat on the back for the job that they're doing in the face of what our government is asking them to do.
Okay. I guess I have one more question for you. So yesterday, SCOTUS handed down an opinion. They voted 6-3 that Louisiana's congressional districting map that was drawn in 2024 violated the Constitution on the basis of racial discrimination. Justice Thomas, said SCOTUS should have never interpreted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to give racial groups an entitlement to roughly proportional representation. And Justice Alito said the state had no compelling interest to justify considering race in drawing the 2024 map, and that the African American voters failed at every step to prove the 2022 map violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that opinion and their statements?
Yeah, so as far as Justice Thomas goes, those words were almost the exact words from our current Chief Justice when he was working for the Reagan administration as an attorney. He actually went even further to say that it was a theory of extremism to pass the Civil Rights Act in accordance with the Voting Rights Act of '64. And so that's where that thought process is birthed from. But I want to bring that back to South Dakotans and how it impacts us here, because as much of a travesty as that is that we see a damaged and weakened voting rights process from the Supreme Court decision, we also have to understand that we have one congressional district in South Dakota. And so many folks are not thinking that the redistricting conversation is going to apply to us. But what this does is it sets what's called judicial precedents. And now on the local level, we can talk about redistricting what our state legislature looks like. It even talks about what city council races look like. And so it does impact us very heavily, particularly speaking when we include our non-tribal or recognized tribal reservations. Those individuals having to fight tooth and nail for a long time just to be recognized for their right to vote. And so this puts them in a position not just to be redistricted, but to be represented by someone who doesn't represent them at all, who doesn't share the same values with them at all, who's never been on the reservation, or maybe sometimes never even had a conversation with someone who is indigenous. And so that is, I keep going back to the word irresponsible. And that's because that's the way I feel about this current administration. That's the way I feel about the decisions that are being made. They're irresponsible to the people that they are supposed to be serving. And so this decision, although we want to be distracted by the congressional redistricting map, it hits home because it does set precedents that our state can fall back on.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we have for you today. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming out.
Thank
Thanks
you.
For
I appreciate you
here.
having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for answering all of my questions.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.